Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series from Research and Publications Department at IIMA. Today, we have the privilege of having with us Professor Swanand Deodhar. Swanand is a colleague and a good friend, and he's a great researcher. I'll give a brief intro of Swanand here. Swanand is an assistant professor of information systems at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He received his PhD in business administration from University of Minnesota. His research interests include online contest, crowdsourcing, and online user engagement. His research is accepted in major IS journals like MISQ, Information Systems Research, Decision Support Systems, and Journal of Strategic Information Systems. So today's paper is evidence from online coding contests, and we are very excited to hear from Swanand on this exciting research problem. Thanks, Swanand, once again for taking up time.
Thank you so much, Anuj. In fact, the whole R&D department for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here. First time, big disclaimer, first time ever I'm presenting an accepted paper. So feel free to ask questions. It's almost a routine now answering questions about this paper. So this paper, hopefully all you can see my screen, is actually a co-authored work with Yash and Gord at University of Wisconsin-Madison and at the respectively. Give you a little bit brief about this paper. So this paper, we started working on it way back in 2018. And we had a very simple idea, which is basically looking at, and I'll of course get into details of it later on, but basically the simple idea was, can a platform level change or can a IT or technological artifact, when it changes, can it change user behavior? And if it does, to what extent and how and so on. So we had this broad sort of a question in mind. And with that idea, we started toying with some projects and started looking at, what can we really draw out there. And this is one idea that really stuck well, I guess, and we all kind of liked it and been working on. So this paper has gone through many iterations, as you would expect. So one of the earlier versions of this paper was presented at HICS, which is the Hawaii conference. Then another version of it, sort of a modified version, was presented at the Academy of Management conference. Then we presented at a bunch of different places. My co-authors presented it and so on. So the paper immensely benefited from all these presentations and also from the reviewers, the 3 anonymous reviewers and the editorial team at MIS Quarterly. This was accepted about, I think just after the start of the new year, around end of Jan somewhere there. Finally received an acceptance after 4 rounds. So happy to present this paper and happy to talk about any questions. Feel free to interrupt as I talk. You don't have to wait till the end. If there's something that's not clear, you have a question, just let me know. All right, so let me start talking about what the phenomena is and what we are really trying to ascertain here. So the big phenomena here basically is around online contests. Now, what is an online contest? So we all at some point must have seen them, must have studied them, participated in them, so on and so forth. So these are basically tournaments or contests or competitions mediated by an online platform, where on one side you have somebody who sets the contest, on the other side you have people who solve the contest. Right? And contest could be a variety of tasks. For example, there are contests that are run for data science tasks. Right? So there's a platform called Kaggle. Some of you may know it. Is a platform that is very well versed in sort of a specialized platform for managing, running data science contests. Then there are platforms that run contests around software development. In fact, one of our studies in one such platform. One of the popular platforms in this space is Topcoder, which runs software development contests. Then there are platforms that run contests for creative artwork, logo design, and so on and so forth. Right? There are several platforms that do that sort of work as well. And people have spent considerable effort, resources in studying these platforms. The focus of the study, however, has been understanding what are the antecedents of some of these outcomes. So if there is a contest happening on Kaggle for a data science related task, what predicts the performance of the solutions that are generated? Or if there is a contest happening for designing a logo, what predicts the quality of the logos that get generated in the right? People have also looked at efforts. So what predicts the number of submissions a contest receives, and so on and so forth. Right? So there are a whole range of these different outcomes, and people have looked at what are the predictors or antecedents for these outcomes. That has largely been the focus of this space of study. Interestingly, this is not unique to IS. For instance, the papers that I've cited here come from all kinds of different journals, from operations, from organization science, management science, from Journal of Marketing Research, and so on. So it's a multidisciplinary field in itself. However, as I said, one of the key missing links in this whole puzzle, or the missing piece of this whole puzzle, is that the platform itself, which runs the contest, is almost considered as a static and ambient entity, which doesn't change, right? Where the idea is the platform exists in the background, and people come and run contests, others participate in it, and so on and so forth. So the platform is almost considered as non-existent, exists in the background, doesn't play any active role, and so on and so on. Which, at least to my mind, was a little bit of a strange thing, given that platform is the central intermediary. So how can the platform remain ambient while the contests are happening? So with that, a little bit what you call a spark, or idea or notion or interest or whatever, we had this broader agenda of examining the effect of platform-wide changes on contestant behavior. So basically what we're trying to address or understand more broadly, beyond just this one paper, is how do IT technological changes on the platform affect how users behave, how users act on it, and so on and so forth. Right? To give an example of one such paper that I clearly remember in recent times, involves a social media platform where they changed privacy norms suddenly as a matter of policy. And these changes in the privacy norms led to significant changes in how users share content, post content, like content, and so on and so forth. We saw that the policy change by a platform had an effect on how users behave on it. Right? So this is as a research question. This has been getting some attention in recent times, but definitely not in the space of online content. Right? So that's how we got interested in it and started looking at it. Now, coming to this one particular paper, of course, this, as I said, this was a broader agenda. From here on, coming to the more specific parts of this paper, we were interested in the fact that platforms that run these online contests have a massive burden in terms of evaluating the contest performance. Right? So, let's say there's a contest happening on platform ABC. Hundreds of people would show up, make their contributions, make submissions, whatnot, right? Now, when these submissions are all received, the platform and the contest organizer has the burden of evaluating these submissions and solutions. Now, this is a pretty heavy burden, so to speak, right? I mean, how do you filter out good from the bad? How do you assess the quality to begin with, and so on and so forth? So, to address this question, interestingly enough, and intuitively enough, I guess, platforms turned to the crowd once again. The idea is crowd is submitting the solution and crowd is evaluating it. Right? So the idea is crowd is sort of both, the actor and the evaluator. Now, in that situation, and that has been quite useful. For example, there are studies published. The one that I've cited here. Look at a platform involving creative artwork for clothes, apparels, and they use crowd-based evaluation like voting and commenting and feedback, etc., to assess the quality of the input that the crowd is, or the output that the crowd is producing. So the crowd is producing goods and crowd is evaluating their own production. Now, you can of course see that there's an inherent problem in it, wherein if I am evaluating what somebody else is doing, that evaluation is not going to be free from any biases. Right? So the idea is that I feel what I did is pretty good, so what somebody else has done doesn't stack up. Right? So the idea is crowd evaluations, while theoretically should reduce the burden of evaluation, it could also introduce a ton of biases, which could actually hamper the efficacy of such a mechanism. Now, in this particular paper, we get down to one specific type of bias that we believe is interesting, which is the bias involving status. Now, when I say status, it's worthwhile spending a couple of minutes understanding what the term status means. So status basically means a social, a person or a company or a group, whatever it is, their position in a socially acceptable hierarchy. So what everybody agrees upon is a hierarchy, say a ranking system, or say, so for instance, in your customer loyalty programs, you have, gold membership, silver membership, and so on and so forth. These are hierarchies. And your position in that hierarchy conveys your status, which basically tells you that where you are with respect to 50 other individuals in the same context. Right? So this is a relational hierarchical notion. It's a social attribute. Now, the interesting facet when we try to combine the idea of status and a hierarchy with evaluation is that status could drive evaluations either way. So on the one hand, there's an argument to be made that somebody who is actually having a higher status could attract fewer evaluations. Right? And the logic there being that status acts as a proxy of competency. If somebody is a high status actor, they are likely to be good at what they do, right? Which means whatever output they produce in a contest is likely to be of a higher quality, right? Which means it's not going to get evaluated. It's going to receive fewer evaluations, right? This is a classic notion. For example, several studies in disciplines like organization management and strategic management and so on and so forth, the people are looked at for the same sort of a unethical act. Companies with different status receive different penalty. Right? The idea is the status determines how much you are attacked, how much you are evaluated, scrutinized, and so on. One way to look at it is that saying higher status, fewer evaluation, your status indicates it. The other way to think about it is higher status could mean more evaluations, which is basically the underlying mechanism being just the more prominent, visible position that one occupies in a status with higher status. Somebody who is higher status is held in higher. This is considered is held on a higher pedestal, so therefore they are held to higher standards, and therefore they will be more scrutinized, evaluated, examined, and so basically, the interesting facet of this problem for us was that here is a social attribute called status. Here is a user behavioral outcome called evaluation. And when we try to combine the two, it's not clear which way the effect is going to work. Do higher status individuals or the status, as status increases, do you get more evaluations, fewer evaluations, and so on. So there was this little bit of a theoretical tension that we found is worth examining empirically, which is really what the core of the paper is. And when it comes out, please read it if it interests you. But the initial part of the papers basically is about setting up this tension involving status and evaluation. So the effect of status on evaluation is uncertain, especially in an online contest setting as well, which is what really we are trying to address in this paper. So the question then becomes, how do you address this, right? And as you start formulating research or research design around it, you would immediately start seeing problems, because status is acquired through your legacy activity. Right? What you have done in the past accrues you status, which means that your status and expertise are going to be intricately linked, right? Which means that whatever effects you observe are going to have a lot of endogeneity embedded in it. right? It's very difficult to tease out a causal inference of status. So there is no clear, obvious way to identify what is the effect of status on evaluation. That was a very obvious sort of an empirical challenge. And I'll explain how we address that challenge. But let me first explain what the empirical context is. So our empirical context to address this broader problem is a platform called Codeforces. So this is an online platform which basically runs contests very frequently, and these are contests around online programming, coding, so on and so forth. And this is a technologically agnostic platform. It doesn't matter what technology you use to code, whichever it is. And here's a typical workflow of what happens on this platform, right? So everything starts with an announcement of a contest where the platform says such and such contest is now going to be conducted. And this contest consists of different and multiple programming tasks, right? And these contests are non-monetary, sort of timed contests. So you have to finish those tasks in a specific amount of time. The next step, once the contest is announced, is that users voluntarily register for the contest. They say, I want to submit solution to problems ABC or whatever, right? And they'll register and then they will submit solutions to the problem. These problems are of varying difficulty. There are contests, and each contest has problems that are really simple to problems that are, you would not be able to solve them unless you are a real expert, not just in the programming, but say mathematical theory behind the problem. So the problems span a wide spectrum of complexity. So once users register and submit solutions, the solutions are open for evaluation, right? So in a contest that is ongoing, almost think of it like a like conveyor belt in a warehouse, right? So stuff is getting packaged, stuff is moving to quality, stuff is getting packaged, stuff is moving to quality, and so on and so on. So solutions get submitted continuously, and whatever is submitted, whatever goes past the initial screening of the platform becomes available for subsequent evaluation by others. So if I am competing in a contest, I submit a solution. Let's say the solution meets the minimum quality criteria. Everybody else who is competing in that contest and who's my rival can, evaluate that solution. The other thing is when submission goes past evaluations, it counts towards me beginning or attaining newer status, getting more reputation, right? So there's a payoff for a contestant to submit a good quality solution. Right? If the solution passes all the checks and balances, you get credits for it. So this is basically what very broadly the setup is. I mean, there are some nuances to it, but we'll come to it maybe later. But more or less, this is how the platform works. Starting with the contest announcement, to users registration, users submitting solutions that passed initial checks and balances go for a wider evaluation by rivals. And if my solution makes it all the way to the end, goes past all the checks and balances, as a submitter, I get credit. Okay? So it's basically the flow of it. Now here you can see that in this description, I particularly highlighted two parts which connect back to the core question that you are trying to address. So there is a very clear mechanism for evaluation to occur. So the idea is that once the solution goes to my peers, those who are competing with me directly, they can evaluate my work. Right? So there is the element of evaluation very clearly embedded in the contest workflow itself. And then there's of course status, where as I make successful submissions, my status rises in the community, right? So on Codeforces platform, I become this sort of well-known developer and so on. So I get this bump in the hierarchy, status hierarchy. So there are both these facets of our core question, which we started with, are present in this empirical. So now coming to the status part of it. So if you remember about a couple of slides ago, I said that it's a bit challenging to isolate the influence of status on evaluation, right? Because your status is organically achieved. You become who you are as a function of what you have done in the past, right? Which means the status and expertise become intricately linked. Therefore, to isolate the effect of status and evaluation, you need to really have exogenous status that has been bestowed upon you rather than you having earned it. And this is how that problem is solved in our context. So this is basically what status means on Codeforces. So you see there are all these categories. If you remember, we talked about status as a hierarchical notion. So this is what that is, right? So as you go from gray to red, your status gets higher, right? You keep getting acquiring these higher positions on the status hierarchy from gray to red. Now, all this status is going to be, you're going to acquire it based on how you compete in a contest, right? Therefore, organically, if we look at any point in time, if you look at a contestant status, that's going to be a function of what they have done in the past. So this by itself does not really give us any exogenous status. The status that has been bestowed upon you is not present in this hierarchy. Fortunately, there is a link that explains how this thing happened. At a point in time, the platform decided, for whatever reason, to rearrange this status hierarchy almost overnight with no prior intimation, or at least no clear prior intimation, where they basically said that here is what we had, and for whatever reason it's not really efficient, or it can be improved, or so on and so forth. So in order to get a better status hierarchy or get a better status standing, we are reorganizing our hierarchy from here to here, right? Now you can see that there's a significant shift, which is basically there's now a new status category that has been introduced, right? So one is there's almost a non-existent position in the hierarchy, which did not exist before this shock. But more importantly, if you see, the ratings have changed. So somebody who had a score of say 2049 in the previous hierarchy would have an orange color, or would be called a master, right? Would be higher up in the hierarchy. But after the change, the 2049 would fall in the lower category, right? Which is one below master, which is candidate master. So suddenly, and you can see this is happening for almost all the categories, right? Suddenly, what has happened is people who had a category, who had a color associated with their names, have suddenly been sort of pulled down to a lower status hierarchy, right? So after the shock, immediately after the shock, the status that these users have is bestowed upon them. It's exogenous, right? It's not a function of what they have done in the past, right? What a 2049% did in the past would give them a status of master. But with the hierarchical change, with almost everything else held constant, that person's status is now violet, right? So they have been downgraded. So we use this exogenous change in the status hierarchy to identify how status would affect evaluations. And as I said, the new status that one acquires is sort of disentangled from their past activities and so on and so on. So, any questions so far before I move to estimation? So if I move to estimation, so what we basically did is so because the status change occurred at a point in time, right? So on one particular date, the platform said old status, this is now the new status, right? And people did not have an option of choosing. They were just attributed this status. So there was no, so there was no opportunity for users to say, oh, I don't like this status, I want to go back to my older status. None of that. So whatever you have, you. So here's what we did. We constructed a contest user panel with one contest on either side of that status shock date. So on one date the status changes, we look at one contest before and one contest after that status shock. In addition to status, these colors and ratings, etc., Codeforces also has another categorization called divisions, which is again sort of operates differently. And people have some restrictions in terms of what division they can compete in and so on and so forth. So to account for that division effect also, we included one contest per division. So in all, we had 4 contests, 2 divisions, and within each division, 1 contest e-shock, 1 contest aftershock. So pre becomes your baseline, post shock becomes your sort of after treatment. So we had about 6,000 odd users who were appearing in our contest, who could be hacked, potentially hacked. And we also avoid attrition, because one question that would obviously come up is what would happen to a user that only operates in pre but doesn't show up in post, right? Or who just shows up in post but doesn't show up in pre. If I show up only in the post shock contest, I don't have a baseline. If I show up only in pre contest, I'm not treated, right? Because I don't show up in the post shock. But because we are using or employing user fixed effects will ensure that any user that has only one observation is going to get excluded from the estimation. So the attrition issue doesn't happen. So this is what our model eventually looks like. So our outcome variable is how many evaluations a user received in a contest. Our predictor is a dummy which said whether the user had a lower status after the shock, which is, so if you read the IV and DV, they basically relate back to the question that I had raised on the second slide, how status affects evaluation. So our independent variable is status, our DV is evaluation. And we are controlling for a bunch of stuff, like we are controlling for the absolute numerical rating that you have. So for example, if I go back here, your color and there's some rating that you may have, right? So we're also controlling for that rating. And we're also controlling for the new color dummy. So again, just to be clear here. So there were a few users who got categorized into this new color called cyan. Now this new color would have some novelty effect. Right? And the idea is that there has never been anybody who is part of cyan color, right? But this is not necessarily any kind of status change. It's just a new category altogether. So we control for those 2 variables, and we also use user and contest fixed. That's basically what our empirical setup looks like. 4 contests spread across 2 divisions, 1 pre-shock, 1 post-shock. And within those contests, we had about 6,000 odd users who would show up. And here's what we find. And because our DV is, of course, number of evaluations, so we primarily use the Poisson estimator. And here's what we find. So if you see, the impact of lower status on hacks is higher, which means that if my status is reduced, I get evaluated more, wherein more people look at my work and scrutinize it more aggressively and so on. So if you remember that status and evaluation tension that we had set up at the very front end, that more status means fewer or more evaluations. Right? And we show that in this particular study, we find that the status actually goes down, you receive more evaluation. We also find that the increased evaluations are actually successful at finding faults. But the idea is not only do I get scrutinized more, it also, of course, finds that there is a higher, more faults and more defects are found. However, when you take a proportional view, you actually see that proportional to the number of evaluation. Now, in this context, the evaluation is called as a hack. It's just a terminology. The platform calls evaluation a hack. Don't have to use it. So, but if you look at proportionally, so for proportionally, if you look at it, the number of successful hacks, the proportion of successful evaluations actually go down. Now, these 3 highlighted estimates tell you a story, which is that if a platform changes status hierarchy and people lose status, then the lost status will lead to more evaluations, the green estimates. However, proportionally, those increased evaluations don't have higher number of successful hacks, proportionally speaking, which means that your evaluation system is now going to get burdened with higher number of evaluations, but you actually don't see proportional increase in successful hacks, which means that your evaluations, increased evaluations may not necessarily increase the efficacy of your evaluation system. So what this shows is that while lower status means more evaluation, those evaluations are not really efficient, may not be efficient, because I don't see a proportional increase in proportionally higher success. So this is basically what our main analysis. I mean, I've kind of glossed over a fair bit of stuff, but this is in essence what our main analysis shows. Now, of course, we throw in a bunch of robustness checks. So we look at whether these effects exist beyond the immediate contest. They do. So if you remember, when I was setting up my estimation slide, I said that we had one pre and one post contest in every division. We changed that specification to keep one pre contest and look at 4 post contests. So after the shock, we look at additional contests, and we see that right up to 4 contests, the effect persists. So it is some persistence. It's not a flash in the pan, right? I mean, the effect continues over time. Are the new evaluations actually new evaluations, or they're just redistribution? So we conduct some analysis to that, and we actually find that these evaluations are net new. So they are not just redistributing the same number of evaluations that existed. We're actually seeing net new evaluations. Are the results robust to simultaneous change in division? There's a typo there, but simultaneous changes in division. So if you remember at the start, I told that there is something called as a division on Codeforces. So we find that along with your color, if your division also changed, whether that changes our result, but apparently it doesn't. So our results are kind of robust to that. Are these results contingent on submissions quality, which is really sort of important dynamic, right? I mean, if the evaluation is purely based on status, it should not be based on submission quality, because my status has been exogenously given to me. So that should not affect my submission quality. And that's exactly what we find. So even when you control for submission quality of the submitters, whatever solutions they're entering, the status related evaluation effects exist. And lastly, we look at who is evaluating. So if you see throughout the paper, the idea is how many evaluations I receive after I lose my status or after I get lower status exogenous. But the other side, the mirror story, is that who is generating this evaluation. Now, we don't find very concrete evidence for this, but the idea, the indications are that you actually get fewer evaluations from those who are lower in the hierarchy prior to the shock. So it's the question of I'm getting evaluated quite a lot, but who is evaluating me? It's actually people who are now up in the hierarchy from me, not those who are in the lower. So this is a very broad sort of a summary of what the paper is. Now, in conclusion, what's the big aha? What's the big takeaway here? Is basically to first the 3 in our view. First is to at least partially resolve this tension of status and evaluation. Because status and evaluation effects there are multiple competing arguments. We provide an empirical evaluation which says that lower status means more evaluations. So if you're lower status, you will actually get scrutinized more. That is an interesting takeaway, because that tells you that the evaluation system is really working as sort of this, with a mindset of collaborative benefit. Because if I am only targeting those who have lower status, I am actually interested in finding flawed submissions. Right? Had the result been opposite, where had we find that as a function of lower status you get fewer evaluations, the story would have been that it's high status actors who are targeted, right? It's more like a sabotage. But in this case, we don't find that. What we find is it's the low status actors who are targeted, which is basically contestants in this contest trying to find faulty submissions. Then we find that always salient IT artifact. The status hierarchy is very prominent on this platform. So if you go to Codeforces, look up any developer's name, just by looking at their name, you will know what their status is, because it appears in that color. Right? So it's very salient. Now, when you change this information artifact, it leads to discretionary changes in discretionary evaluation decisions, right? Which is a takeaway for how crowd evaluations. And of course, we are looking at causal identification of status changes impact in digital set, which in itself has remained a bit undecided. For the platform, what the implication is that we recommend concealing status related information when contributions are presented, because or contributions are presented for evaluation. Because as I said, you get more evaluations, but they are proportionally not more efficient at finding faults. So your evaluation system is just getting burdened with more evaluations which don't really give you anything. It doesn't seem to be giving you anything. So we recommend concealing this sort of an information. But even if you have to provide that information, we recommend creating devising techniques where we would basically play out or show information that says, status is not a perfect indicator, much like what you have in, investment platforms where past success is not a predictor of future success. So we would recommend adding these sort of devising interventions. And what the future research is, basically, while our whole story, because the way the status shock was created is that it's the reduction in status that is leading to effects. But at the same time, there could be stories where, or there could be settings where the status shock is not pushing people down, it's actually pulling people up, where people experience status gain instead of status loss. So how would status gain affect crowd evaluations? That's something that we have not studied. In fact, much of the status dynamics literature has focused on status loss, where they look at what happens to those who, especially high status actors, when they lose status, what happens to them. So there's quite a bit of work that is to be done in terms of what happens to people when they gain status arbitrarily. And also looking at alternative restructuring of status hierarchy, where the idea is instead of inserting one layer at the bottom or closer to the bottom of the hierarchy, what happens if you insert a layer at the top of the hierarchy, and so on and so on. Or what if you create a completely new hierarchy in itself? Right? Or there are different ways in which status hierarchies could be restructured. So these are our estimates robust to such alternative restructuring of status hierarchy? We don't know, but that's an area that that's a limitation. So that's an area that we would like to expand this research. Yeah, that's basically what I had in a nutshell. Try to be very brief. We now have good time for questions. So yeah, any questions?
Any questions?
The paper is, as I said, not out. So whenever it comes out, I'll be happy to pass on the link. But yeah, let me know if you have questions.
Hello, sir. Congratulations with your paper.
Thanks, Dhruv.
So I was just wondering, do we know whether the evaluation pattern has changed because of the status change? And even so, let's say before the status changed, they were giving the evaluation within the categories. And let's say after the status change, they are giving for evaluation one category above. So does this have any effect on the findings?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, so this is the closest to what you're asking is this. So the idea is who is evaluating. So in our setting, we only have a limited evidence to assess who is actually generating these evaluations. And we find that these evaluations, a fewer of them are actually coming from people below in the hierarchy. So the you are always being targeted by somebody who is above you, which is what you would expect. So that doesn't really change with respect to before or after the shock. In the sense, even before shock, those who were above you would be targeting you. That's not, so that doesn't much change. But we don't have a definitive answer about who is evaluating and whether that changes. Because so here we are only looking at incoming evaluations. So who receives more evaluation? That definitely changes, right? I mean, the idea is once my status is lost, I would not have gotten so many evaluations, but now I do. That definitely changes. But who evaluates that, we don't.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Okay. There are no questions. Swanand has already provided his email ID. If you have any questions that you think probably you can reach out to him. And
Yeah.
so thanks a lot, everyone. And
Thank you
thanks,
so much.
Swanand, once again for taking out time and sharing this exciting
to.
research with us.
Sure.
And yeah, see you sometime soon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much.